could you please talk to me about the preparation that you all made for Market Garden?
Well, first of all, we began to look at maps, and we began to look at where, when we came in, where we would jump and what airport we would leave from. And the preparatory things that you do anywhere as a paratrooper, and when you were going to jump, and who was going to be in your plane, and all this stuff we were doing in preparation for when we did jump to go into England, that we were ready to go, and our planes were set and everything. And then on two occasions, while this was going on, they moved us out of Leicester and put us in temporary barracks out at the airport. So if we were leaving early in the morning to jump in Holland, we were set to go. So that we would do that, and we'd get up in the morning, and in case the planes were ready and they decided that the weather was okay and across the channel and everything else, and if we were ready to go, then we'd go on board the planes and go. If it wasn't, then they'd take us back and they would put us, and they'd put us back in our tents. Wait for tomorrow. See what it looks like tomorrow, if it's going to be better tomorrow. And I always remember this. A fellow by the name of Robert Blankenship, he was from Georgia. Booby Trap, we call him. He was a close friend of ours. He's in the book all over the place. And he had a nice voice. He had a good singing voice. And I could hear him in the morning when we woke up to go to be ready to board planes. I'd start out singing this song. We started out song. And then we'd start singing songs. And I could always remember him. I always remember singing. The singing songs and airborne songs and singing, and I always remember him. And we'd chime in, some of us. And then we'd go back to doing what we were doing, preparing for whatever it was. And then the next day, if the weather looked good, we were trucked and we got out to the planes and we lined up at the way we were going to come out of the plane. And then the one that I was in, I was the jump master. And it was always the case when you jumped in a plane, if there were 16 paratroopers, it was always the case with us when you jumped over behind enemy lines, that the leading person in the plane, the leading person in terms of rank, jumped first. He was in the door. He would watch the ground to try and recognize the jump field where we knew we were going to jump because of the aerial photography we had of the area. We knew where we were going to jump. And I'd be there when I was the jump master, looking out ahead. And if I could see off at some distance landmarks that I could recognize, I would holler back to my troops, stand up, hook up. And the men would jump right up and they'd get in the middle of the line. And they put the snap swivel on a chain, and they'd hooked up, they'd be ready to go. And I'd stand there watching. And they were ready to go. And so when we started out, that's the way it was. I was first. And the end guy, the last guy, always was the case, was the leading non-commissioned officer. That'd be my platoon sergeant. And he brought up the rear end because if anybody in between was hesitant, and that didn't happen, but if it did, the reason was this guy would shovel my head, get going. I mean, he was a cleanup guy. He wasn't going to let anybody be behind. And so that's the way it was. And we started off from there, and I'm leading. I got this NCO in the back. We get near our jump field, and we get near our jump field, and then I notice that a plane gets hit, one of our planes in our formation. we were flying what we call via V's. That is, the planes formed V's, and we came over. And when we did that, and we entered the coast in Holland, when we entered the coast, then the Germans opened fire on us, and they downed one of our planes. The plane was led by one of our lieutenants in H Company, Rinkowitz. His name was Rinkowitz. His plane was shot down, and they landed in the plane, or they jumped out after it was hit and everything. They jumped out, and they were in enemy territory then because we hadn't landed yet. And the Germans came along to round them up as POWs, and the Dutch underground came along to help them hide from the Germans and all that. But I watched all that happen. And as we got closer to the jump field, when we were nearing our landing field, I said, stand up and hook up. So they'd stand up and hook up. And then I'd stand back, and then I'd holler back, are you ready? To get them ready. When I hollered, are you ready? The Germans on the ground opened up on us with small arms fire, with rifles. You know, they were on the ground, maybe we were 400 feet in the air. That wasn't very far. They could hit the planes. So they started firing at our planes as we got near their key points. And all of a sudden, the sergeant hollers back, 2 names. He gave me the names, which I wrote in the book. They've been hit, sir, they've been hit. And they crumbled to the ground. They were hooked up, but they were still hooked up to this cable up here, but they laid on the bottom of the floor. And where we had to jump, we had to shovel down the middle of the plane to get to the door to jump out. So if these people there, we couldn't move our parachutes forward. So I hollered back, I'd hook him and move him to the side. So he did that. He unhooked himself and went over and he moved them to the side. And those guys returned to England with a plane. And they were shooting at us. And then when we got on the ground, they shot at us again. So that was our introduction into Holland. And the men that I had hit, the plane that was shot down, the Rinkowitz people, a lot of them went into prison camp, and some of them escaped and rejoined us later on in the war, escaped from a prison camp. And later on in the war, they came to us. But you're asking me about Holland, and this is all part of getting into Holland. And we had our jump zone, and we had our mission. We had our purpose, our objectives, what we were supposed to do. And we did that. And once we got there, our first objective was Nijmegen. Nijmegen, we jumped near Nijmegen. I jumped near Nijmegen. Our first mission was to free Nijmegen, because Nijmegen was the site of one of our objectives, the south end of one of the main bridges over the Wall River. It was a key objective in the Market Garden program. And we jumped near there and disembarked there and began undertaking operations. So then our stay in Holland began, and from there was various other things, including moving us up to the dike to prepare to cross the Wall River.
Can you tell me a little bit about the journey from England to Holland? What was going on in your mind? I mean, this is the first time that you would be back in combat since Anzio. You know, this is the first combat jump that you would make. What were you thinking about on that journey, Colonel Magellis?
Well, what I was always talking about was when I jumped out, that there were 2 things that I had to be sure about. One is that I was in a plane, I was able to give my command orders because they jumped on my command. And when they jumped on the command, then my big concern was that since I was first, and there were 16 men jumping as the plane was moving, the 16th man could have been a long ways back by the time you shuffled out and jumped out and the plane got down. My big concern was to assemble my unit, because we didn't jump all together, say, in a car. We didn't drive in a car. we were scattered one after the other. You got to visualize this now. You're at the door, the jump master's gone out, and then one after that they start peeling out. And you're back and you're looking where your men are, trying to get some idea. And before I did that, I had to be concerned about another thing. In my plane, I had also put in the baggage of the plane some composition C, which was a plastic that we could mold into grenades. And I've used them during the war. In fact, I used one in the Battle of the Bulge to disable the tank. And I'd have to worry about that, and I'd have to worry about excess ammunition, and I had to worry about crew-served weapons like mortars, 60-millimeter mortars that we could carry. And so I'm there. I got to worry about assembling my unit, about recovering the things we dropped with, and organizing to move out on our mission, because we're just now on the ground. We haven't done anything yet. And to get your men together, and to get them to safety, get them off that field, get them away from German fire. All that ran through my mind. And as I came out, I looked right away for my bundles, what we call bundles, because they were wrapped up in bundles and dropped out of the bottom of the C-47. And we wrapped up in the bundles, and they were discolored machine gun, we could tell. And if we were looking for our machine guns, the machine gunners who had that gun when we were jumping in a plane could go and look for that bundle and get their machine gun out and so on. And all that is part of getting assembled on the ground. And at the same time, the Germans are firing at you, and you've got to take cover and return fire and protect your men and get organized and get to your first assembly point as a unit before you can start out on your mission as to what it was to clear the area around Nijmegen and so on for the British troops coming up could move on into Nijmegen.
You being the platoon leader, you were the closest member of your stick to the door of the plane.
I stood in the door. I stood in the door with two hands. I stood in the door, and I had a hand on each side of the plane. Here's the door, and I had my hands here, so that when I jumped out, I pushed off with my hands as well. Out I went, my backpack. So I stood in the door. I didn't stand back and then go running to the door. I stood in the door with my hands on the side to push myself out. After we entered the Dutch airspace, that is, we crossed the English Channel. They weren't fighting us in the English Channel, but they did shoot at us on the ground. And so when we crossed the channel from where we were at, and we got into opposite Holland in what we call the Walcheren Islands, Walcheren, there was little islands. The Germans had anti-craft guns there, kind of protected their shoreline. That was their territory. And so that when the plane started, and we were one of the lead planes that started, we ran into small arms fire from the ground. These guys started shooting at us. And they hit it, and they hit the plane. The plane was disabled, so the men had to jump out. The plane was disabled, so they jumped out, and the plane crashed. And I don't remember anybody getting killed, and the wounded probably did. Somebody had to get wounded. And then when they got on the ground, they tried to assemble. In the meantime, we're in Holland, and the Dutch could see these guys jumping out of the plane because this Holland territory was along the coastline the Germans had it occupied. They were defending it. And so they rallied to that point to round up these paratroopers who were jumping there. And in the meantime, Rinkowitz and his men tried to take cover and defend themselves and get in a position where they could fight back. But then the Germans sent force enough in there to round them up and take them prisoners.
Sure.
And while this was going on, the Dutch underground also could see this because we were in Holland. They rallied to their assistance on the ground to help them all they could. But eventually the Germans, this is their territory now. They rounded these guys up and took them off to a prison camp. And we didn't see Rinkowitz and some of the others until much later in the war. But that was the case with them. And so it was. We were over Holland. They weren't shooting at it, but we were over Holland when they opened fire on us because that's where their guns were. They didn't have any ships or guns in the channel. They couldn't do that, obviously,
Sure.
from the tactical standpoint. It doesn't make any sense even to talk about it. So, but when we did get in Holland, they were prepared to defend.
And I mean, that plane that you saw go down, was that the only one you saw hit before you hit the
It's
ground?
the only one that I saw crash, yes.
Okay.
I know there were others, but it's the one that I were aware of now.
Sure.
Now, mind you, this was a whole division. And not only that, but there was the 101st Airborne. There was also the British. There were also the Rangers. There were also a lot of other people in on invasion of Holland. It wasn't just us. But our mission was Nijmegen and the bridges over Nijmegen. That was our mission. That's why we're crossing the Wall River, because all of us had a mission when we hit the ground.
Absolutely.
And as far as the British were concerned, they were trying to move up to cross these bridges and get on north of there where they could turn and then charge into Germany, into Berlin, Germany, from the north. And so that was our mission. But we all had different missions. The 101st Airborne, for instance, jumped below us. There were bridges and rivers below us that the British armor had to cross. They jumped to hold those bridges, and they did. And then the British crossed there, and the next ones they ran into was us at Nijmegen, which was 10 miles to the north. And we engaged them there, and we also fought for Nijmegen. That's why when you go to the anniversary of Market Garden and you see the liberation, not of all Holland, but of Nijmegen, you'll know that it was our outfit, the 3rd Battalion, Maggie and Rivers, and what I'm describing to you, that jumped there and did things on the ground to secure the area and so on and so forth, to clear the area so the British could move up and get to the bridges. So I don't want to get all confused. I don't want you to think it was only the 82nd did the fighting.
No, I know. But we're just concerned with what you saw and what you
Well, that's
did.
what I'm telling you.
But
Now then, the next thing was we were in this larger area. There were Germans all over. The battalion commander asked me to take my unit and to head to the east to clear that whole area of Germans. There were little towns and everything there around the airport. You know, the airport just wasn't there by itself. There were people living there and there were towns there, and they asked me to go there. So I take my whole platoon, take them all, everybody. Well, I didn't have many anyway. And we line up and we start out and we go into these towns one after the other. I'm leading in the front. I got 2 columns, one on each side. As we come into these towns, the Dutch people, recognizing that we were Americans and the Germans were pulling back, came out and were waving at us, shaking hands with us, would bring us something to drink or eat, and follow with us. Others came along and wanted to join us. And I was only concerned about clearing the area between here and Nijmegen so that our units could move in there. And so that went from one to another. We got into one city, and there weren't any Germans there because they had seen us. They knew that we had jumped there, so they pulled back. They pulled back and rejoined their unit wherever it was in Holland, up by the river or wherever, but they pulled back. And so these towns that we went there didn't have any Germans, except one of them had a wounded German that the Germans left behind because they couldn't move him. And we took him prisoner. It's the only prisoner we got because all the rest of the Germans had pulled back out of this path. But I continued with it. And I did that and cleared all that. When we got to Nijmegen, outside of Nijmegen, the snipers were firing at us from Nijmegen. So I had to contend with the snipers and the other Germans on the ground so that we could get to the riverbank. Our objective was not Nijmegen. Nijmegen we had to take it, obviously, but our objective was the south end of that bridge. And I don't want to lose track of that. I don't want to get mixed up in something that wasn't our objective. In any event, we moved towards there, and we moved towards Nijmegen, and when we get there, then I join up with our other forces. And then we're there, and we hold up. And this was on the second or third day. General Gavin comes down, and he tells Cook, he says, we're going to have to make a crossing against that river. And he says, I'm going to want the 504 to do it. We're going to have to cross that river. We're going to have to get in that river and have to cross it. Then the word came out to us after we got in Nijmegen and cleared out all these outlying areas, and everything else seemed to be okay, that we had to be prepared to cross the river. Now let me pause here. I should have to explain a whole lot to you here. You know we're paratroopers, and we can only take with us what we jump with, only weapons that we can jump out of a plane with. We can't take tanks. We can't take any heavy weapons. We're light infantry. But still, we had to prepare to cross the river. We weren't amphibious. We never had any boats. A lot of the kids that were with me just out of high school had never even been in a boat. Yet we're being told we're going to have to cross that swift river, which we were able now to see from our vantage point. It was a swift river, and commercial vehicles were going up and down. And on the other side were the Germans. That's what we were up against. So the question is, how do we get across? Somebody says, oh, don't worry. That was always the question, don't worry. They once it said it wasn't their hide, so they could say, don't worry. But in any event, we're waiting then for the boats to come. They said the British armored units have boats. As soon as they get there, we'll have boats to cross the river. That was it. Now you got to remember, the British units were back at Eindhoven and below there. They hadn't gotten up to us at Nijmegen. They still had a fight to get up there. We didn't have any boats. But in the meantime, what do? We move along that dike, and if you saw pictures of it or been over there, you know what I'm saying. It's a dike that's on top wide enough so that vehicles could drive over it. It's high enough so that you could take cover behind it and be shielded from ground fire from the other side. It was a protection both from water and from enemy forces coming into Holland. It had been there ever since the Huns had tried to take Holland. It's always been there. So what do? We move along that dike knowing we're going to have to cross that river. We didn't know where, but we start behind there with cover. And finally, after some time, said the British boats are coming. The British boats are coming. And they did. And they'd come through. They came through the 101st, got it through Nijmegen, which we had secured, and followed up behind us, and then came up behind us. Now all that is in the video, Maggie's War. A picture of the trucks, a picture of everything, and I'm telling you, it's all in there. They pulled in on this high ground up above. We're down below. They get back up there, the British, and they lift back the hood, the top of the thing, and a couple of the Brits get in there, and they start peeling off these canvas boats. Here's your boat, here's your boat. Get your boat, come and get your boat. We looked at the thing, it was a canvas boat, collapsible, because they were piled up like sandwiches. Here's your boat. So we rushed over there. I rushed over with some of my men, got a boat, got a hold of it, and started dragging it around. There weren't any paddles. There was no propulsion. It was just a boat. Somebody said, how are we supposed to get these things across the river? Somebody said, look it over there. There's a pile of paddles. Go over there and get the paddles that you need. Go over and get your paddles. So some of the guys ran over there and started grabbing paddles. Now, there weren't enough for everybody, but some grabbed paddles and took the boat, and they moved down the river. And the other boats kept doing the same. In the meantime, the Germans were on the other side, and they were bringing in reinforcements, and they brought in units that were stationed nearby that had machine guns, and they also had captured a courier that was carrying a map of the area, and it had the plan for the jump and where we were going to jump. So they were able, therefore, to defend against that. They were able, therefore, to put machine guns where they expected that we would be crossing. Now, when I talk about machine guns, I talk about the British putting in there, I say 2 or 3 times as many men as we had to cross the river. And they got in there and they dug in on their side of the dike, their side of the river, like it was ours, was built up, and they were behind it. And they dug in machine guns up there, so that they could cover the whole area in front of them from the river once we get across the river. They laid their machine guns out. Okay, so we get there. Finally, we get there, and we got enough men, but we then got to realize what we were up against. I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again, and I hope I don't have to say it anymore to anybody. We knew it was an act of futility. We knew it was a suicide mission. We knew it was a suicide mission. We knew it was a suicide mission. Now, you want to call me a liar, that's fine. But that's what it was. We knew it. Now, how did we react? You're just out of high school. Let's put it, you're just out of high school. And you're 20 or 21 years old. You join the paratroopers, and all of a sudden, here you are, and you're asked to get in that canvas boat with a paddle and paddle across a wide river against any machine guns dug in on the other side. And you had no support. We had no supporting units with us. We had nothing. Just us. Just us and the canvas boats and our weapons. And so we looked at that, and the guys looked at it, and they said, well, this is it. It's a suicide mission. The guy says, hey. One of the guys says, I could see him here. He looks and he takes off a watch or something. Hey, you, hey. Calling back to the rear echelon, hey, you, come and get this. I'm not going to need it where I'm going. He didn't expect to make it on the other side. Other guys were getting together, and you could see them. They were saying their goodbyes and their prayers. This was it. Nobody humanly possible could do this. We were asked to do about it. It's at that point where I write in the book that Rivers and I got together while we were back here and all this was going on. And I said to him, I said, Rivers, if you make it across this river and you ever get back to the States, promise me one thing. You will go to Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, and tell my mother what happened. He says, Maggie, I'll do the same for you if you do the same for me. Go to Massachusetts and go and see my mother and my family and tell them what happened, why we couldn't make it. Will you do that? We promised each other. While we're doing that, a guy comes over to me. He's a lieutenant. His name was Busby, Harold S. Busby. He was from my company, but he was one of my buddies, and he was strung out with us on our side of the river. And he came from over there, over to me in Rivers, because I was his buddy. And he said to me, "Maggie, I got a feeling I'm not going to make it today. I'm not going to make it." I said, "Listen, Busby, knock that off. You know you're going to make it. You made it on everything else. You've been through everything. Italy, Africa, you've been through the whole thing. It's no different. You're going to make it. Don't worry. Get it out of your mind." I looked at him, and he was sweating. I write it just the way I saw it. It's in my book. Sweat was running down his face. He was perspiring. And I wrote then and there, and I say it again, I had a premonition. The Lord was telling me that Pappy Busby was not going to make it that day. That's the way I wrote it. That's what I believed. That's what I believe this day, that he had a premonition he wasn't going to make it. Okay. That was a story up and down the line. I write a lot of them in there because that's the human side of it. That's the side of why I wrote the book. Because this didn't happen in Berlin. It didn't happen in London. It didn't happen in any of the big cities. It didn't happen in general headquarters. It didn't happen at the Pentagon. It didn't happen where all the brass was at. All the generals, all the presidents. It didn't happen there. It happened where the men smelt the gunpowders right up against it. Their life was on a line. And one of them had a premonition that the Lord was calling him, and I believed him. Now picture yourself for a minute. Let me pause here. If you think I'm laying it on you, pause for a second. Pause the fact that you're 21 years old, making me a year older than you were. You've been out of high school maybe 2 years, long enough to join the paratroopers and be with me on that river crossing. You hadn't known war. You were a peace-loving family. You loved each other. You abided by the law. You felt strongly about your country. You believed in the rule of law. You believed in the freedoms that we enjoyed, and you felt you had to do your part. Put yourself in that position. But you never experienced it. It's new to you. Because we did get replacements to cross that river. We didn't have enough men. We'd lost men. We had replacements. And I might add, to fill this out for you in considerable detail, while all this was going on and we were losing men in Normandy, paratroopers in Normandy, and we were losing men everywhere, and in Holland, the paratrooper units at Fort Benning weren't making enough paratroopers to ship over as replacements. They weren't making them enough. So they opened parachute school in London or somewhere in England. They opened the parachute school and they trained paratroopers. Right there, American paratroopers out of other units. You could leave your unit and go and join, say, the 45th Division and become a paratrooper. You had to make a few jumps or something. We couldn't get paratroopers enough for the casualties we were receiving. That's what we faced crossing that Wall River. Now pause again for a minute. What do? You volunteered for it. You knew when you volunteered for it that you were doing something hazardous. You knew you'd be called on things that would be risky. And here it is. You're up against it. What you felt could happen is happening. So you do the best you can. You put your boat in the water and you start paddling. You don't have enough paddles, Use the butt of your Thompson submachine gun. You're Maggie and you're in the boat next to one of these guys. I don't have a long-handled rifle, so I use the butt of my Thompson submachine gun, leaning over the side, trying to paddle to make those boats go across that river, while bullets were in the air all over the place. Let me pause for a minute. If you don't believe this, I don't blame you, because this is almost untrue, that men would be asked to do this. We had no medical support. We had no artillery support. We didn't have any overhead fire support. We didn't have any backup units. It was just us charging forward against enemy machine guns dug in to capture bridges, and we knew it. Put yourself in that position. Would you have been mad at anybody? No. No. Because you were a paratrooper, you knew that would happen to you. Could happen to you. If it was happening to you, so what? This was war, and we're nowhere near Berlin yet. So what do? You pick up and you start charging forward. You're the chaplain. And you go in the first wave with the men because you said, as we were trying to get across the river, if my men ever needed me, they need me now, in the first wave of the river crossing. When he got over on the other side, a German shell landed near him and hit him, and he was wounded. Yet he had on him first aid bandages and so on, and when I saw him off to my right on the ground, he was bandaging people who were bleeding. The chaplain. Somebody else is coming back and saying, so-and-so isn't going to make it. He's dead. I saw him. He's dead. He's dead. We didn't grieve over it. There was only one way to go forward. You couldn't turn around and go back. Half the boats were full of holes. And those that weren't, they were navigable. So that was it, us, them, against them. So you charge forward. And you charge in the direction of fire. And you take your casualties. In the meantime, a new front opens up on you that we didn't know about. And that was another fortification that even British intelligence weren't aware of it, nor Dutch intelligence. There was an old medieval fort called Fort Holland. It was back off of their deck on their side of the river. That was a medieval fort. It was a fort with a moat around it and everything else. Underground, there were positions up on top to fire to protect us. And that had been there all the while, had not been used. It was abandoned. But the Germans used it. They put weapons up on top of it. They put weapons on it. They put weapons that would have explosive power in the air and send fragments out over the men. We didn't know that when we started across that river. All we knew was they had machine guns. So when I saw that, and I had my platoon sergeant with me, who I had just bandaged up wounded. I was wounded. I said, come on, we're heading for that fort. I then was aware of its existence. We're heading for that fort. I said, nobody's going to get across this river as long as they're taking pot shots at us. So that's what we did. I started out, my platoon sergeant follows me, he's wounded. Several others, one of them's in a book, is Leroy something. His name is in there, I got it in there. We get to that boat, and sure enough, there were Germans up on top of that boat. They're firing at us. He took us the parachute harness, his parachute stuff, threw it on the ground, jumped in the water around it in the moat. If you can visualize a medieval moat with a drawbridge on the opposite side, which we weren't aware of its existence, and the rest of it climbing, going up their peak, and up on top they're all taking pot shots at you. Envision that. This kid takes off his equipment, he jumps in the water, takes off his jacket, and he starts up that incline, start crawling. It was an incline. It's hard for me to explain a medieval fort to you. But if you read my description of it, and you see the movies that have been taken since then, people now live there in that boat, you can understand what we were up against. Anyway, he starts up there. We're down below waiting to hear. The people that were firing at us apparently pulled back under, realizing that their moat was that they were being attacked and surrounded. They were in danger. When he got up near the top, I would say near the top, where a man would lay with a rifle and fire, say 2-3 feet from the top, and you could fire down. Some Germans got up there and fired at us, and one of them hit this sergeant. And if you had the book, his name is in there, and you want to look it up, go ahead. But write it in there because I wrote his name in there. And they fire, and they hit him. And they ran a bullet, I think, through his neck, around his neck muscle. And he rolled down, he toppled down to what you call it. Then I hollered, men, the opening's on the other side. We were on the wrong side. So then we pick up, and another gunner, I think George Hyde, who's still alive, takes his machine gun, has joined me, and we go around the other side, and there was an opening there. Where in the moat, in a drawbridge. The bridge was down, but you could still drive a cart across there. And we went there, and I opened up. We set up that machine gun, and we started firing into Fort Hoffman, Holland. The ones that were there then knew they were under fire and being surrounded, so they went back into their cover. I didn't see the need to wait there. That wasn't our objective. The objective we could see was the bridge. So I left the machine gun there and somebody else there and said, let's go. We pick up and we head out, and we head for the bridges. I'm looking for friendly troops. We're running into enemy troops. Eventually, we do get to the bridges. Our men, some of them had reached there. Some of them had crossed already, had gotten across, everything. And then when we got there, they signaled to the British, we have both sides of the bridge. We have both sides. They didn't do anything. So then some more fighting took place, and finally it repeated. The call is, come on across the armor. And eventually they did, and 3 of them started. 3 tanks, 3 British tanks that had reached a point from below us where the 101st Airborne Division was at. They had reached that point, and they started 3 tanks, and they started to cross. And we were on this side, and we held our breath, not knowing if somehow the Germans had a way of blowing that bridge up while they were doing this from a remote area. We didn't know that. I mean, this is all new territory to us. But they get across, and they start across. And finally, they're on the other side, and I'm not, that time had reached there with my men. And we were engaging men in the rafters. And then the tanks were there, and I remember Rivers. He'd already been there at that site where the 3 tanks were. He was there before me. And he told them guys, get this goddamn cans, get these cans, and get your ass up there and save your division, or I'll blow your brains out, and I'll take these tanks myself. He told them that in his language. Take these goddamn tanks and get across and get it over there. And he looked down and he got off of there. He got off the tank and he said, sir, I have my orders. Cross this bridge and wait for further orders. They didn't do anything. Didn't do anything. Can you believe that? All these men killed, all these lost. The tanks are over there. 3 of them are there. But that's all they had. They didn't have their full unit to attack as a unit. But they were there. They were on our side. We could have pushed ahead. But they didn't do it. I then yell at my guy, get down off of there. Get off of that gun. Get off of that. I said, get this thing going. Get in there. He says, sir, I have my orders and I'm not doing anything till I get further orders. And he goes over to the tank, and hanging on the side was a kettle by the handle. Had a little handle, a big round bowl as the tea kettle. And he gets out a little stove somewhere, like we had a coal burner, and he lights it up, and he puts some in there. He puts some tea in there and some water, and he started making tea. I'm yelling at him, take these goddamn tanks and get your ass up there. He said, I might tell we get further. They never got their further orders. We never got to the other side. That night, that British unit that was surrounded tried to escape because there was no relief for them. And they lost a lot of men in that event. That's when they pulled us out and put us down at the Weiler Mere to defend our holdings, which was still in Holland, against Germany, which was across at the Weiler Mere. So that the Holland story continues of when we move out of there, and then since we didn't move on to go up to the British objective or take that bridge, they sent me and I think maybe another platoon, 2 platoons, besides me, over on this side of the Weiler Mere to defend our shore from the Germans coming in and attacking us in Nijmegen, because we still were in Nijmegen. The war was still on. And that's why I was ordered to take a patrol and go over across the enemy lines, across the Weiler Mere, and secure prisoners. Find out what their plans are. What are they going to do? Well, our intelligence indicated they planned to wipe out the 82nd Airborne Division. And they had to indicate how they were going to do it. They were going to have 2 divisions of infantry and 1 division of armor, and they're going to wipe us out. Well, when they heard us back at division, they got all excited. So who'd they call? They called Tucker. Who Tucker called? Eventually it was Maggie. Take your platoon and get over there and get some prisoners. Now that's another story. But this is the Holland story. Now there was a lot of Holland fighting in Holland on patrols and elsewhere. But this is what I write about. This is the thing. And this is what leads up to it. And anything that fills in with that is all right. And I write about this in great detail. And anybody who's willing to look at the map, they'll find exactly what I'm telling them. The Weiler Mere, everything exactly. They can go to the library and look at it. They can order the book and buy it. Otherwise, you can read my book. However you want to do it, if you want to pursue it further. But that's the story, and I'm telling it to you because my friend Richie here wants you to have the inside story from somebody who experienced the fighting, who smelt the gunpowder, who knew what the war was all about. He wasn't back at higher headquarters. He wasn't in Washington. He wasn't in London. He wasn't in higher headquarters. He wasn't in anything. He wasn't a commander. He was one of the guys that was up front engaging the enemy in close order drill to try to capture those bridges and make it possible for the British to proceed on their mission and on into Rome and get the war over with. He went back to his unit, and he started across the river. like everybody else. But mind you now, I'm talking about I company, and I was in H company, and when you look at, say, 25 or 30 guys spread out 5 or 10 yards, you got a football field in between me and Busby and somebody else. It's a long word. So I don't know what happened when he got older, but their fate had to be similar to ours. They ran into machine gun fire, and all that I'd heard was that Pappy got across the river. He didn't get killed in the river. They didn't hit him in the river, and he didn't drop in the river. He made it across, and he got out of the boat, and he was on the other side when the German machine guns opened fire. And apparently, and I've always believed, from what I knew at the time, because I never researched it in terms of the history of it, even if anybody'd have a history of it, I never researched it except that I knew at the time that he made it across the river, that is, across the water, and he was on the other shore, but that the machine gun fire got him. Now, who he was with or whatever, I don't know. But I do know that if you go to Holland now, and you go to the American Cemetery in Holland, where many of my buddies are buried, and where Pappy Busby is buried, you'll see the name up there, Harold S. Busby, killed in action in Holland, the date and so on, killed in action on such and such a date, and it's there, and it's also, I filmed it also for my video, Maggie's War. So when I stand there and I put my hand on that cross, it says Harold S. Busby, I tell his story as much as I knew, and as much as I'm telling you now, that I didn't see him again after he left and crossed the river, except that I knew that he made it across, but that he didn't make it inland very far, for he was cut down, and I assumed that it was machine gun, because that's what the most fire was, but it could have been whatever. It was never important to me whether it was a machine gun or a machine pistol. He was killed there. He didn't move. He didn't go any further. And he's still buried there, and his family apparently has chosen to leave his body remain there. Now, I say this because it's an interesting point, that I've had other guys that were killed in action and were buried at the site of the action. And not only with me, but other Americans. I mean, they fell with their buddies that say a Marine, let's say, might have got killed in Iwo Jima or somewhere. And some of his other buddies are buried there in Iwo Jima. He might have preferred to be buried where his buddies were buried, but if he had a choice. But if the guy is dead, as was the case with Buffy, as it was this case when I heard about it, he was dead. He didn't have a choice of what they should do with him, except that if nobody claimed the body or whatever, and it was never any place to ship it, that he was buried on that field. And I remember going across that field in Holland and looking for troops that said 504. And I saw one other name while I'm on it, and I'm on this bit. Another name that I saw was Rigopoulos. John Rigopoulos was his name. He was in my platoon. He was with me in the mountains of Italy. He was with me and had been with me. He joined as a replacement, and he was in the river crossing. And so John Rigopoulos was with me, and I was particularly interested in him because, like with me, I believe his parents were Greek immigrants like my parents, And I believe that John Rigopoulos, like me, was born in the U.S. and he was American, and he was an American. But I had a feeling for him because his name, obviously, Rigopoulos, is Greek. He and I would talk about things, and I felt a special attachment with him. So when we're in there and we're fighting, and I'm asking about various guys, and also I got to talk. I might mention this to be a point of interest. I might mention that I did talk to his niece, who was with me on this trip to the hospital or to the cemetery. She came to a number of things that included the Wall River Crossing and those who fought in it. And they contacted me and tried to get information about him. And the story that I got was from her and others, and I wrote it in a book, the way I knew it, that he was charging forward. He'd made it across the river, and he was charging forward with some other guys in a group, and a machine gun fire opened up on him, and he got hit in the hand. And he came running out of there, and he raised his hand, and he says, "Look, I got me a Purple Heart." And he raised his hand in the air. I write this in the book. "I got me a Purple Heart." And he was hit by a machine gun. But a little later, before he got to the dike, a machine bullet killed him. And he died there. And I heard about it. And he says, well, Rigopoulos, they were telling him who all got killed. And Rigopoulos was one of them. There were a lot of other names. I mentioned all that I could remember. But I mentioned him because his niece, and if you look in the book, or if you made an effort, you could talk to her. She's been to the cemetery. She knows all about John Rigopoulos. She knows about the Wall River Crossing. And I may even have her name, but I can't go through 2 months of going through papers trying to find names of family members. I mean, my brain is good, but you know, but it don't hold everything. And so, but in any event, I mentioned that to him because he was also killed besides Busby. And also there was an officer was killed who was a friend that we knew, and his name I may have written in the book. We had a number of people killed, obviously, in that Wall River Crossing. It was bloody on land. It was bloody in every respect. And so I really wanted the viewer and the listener to get an idea of what it was like when we got across that river without any support, without any backup support, without any artillery support, with any other units supporting us, with any aerial support, without any ground support, without anything except us and the Germans in front of us. And I want him to place himself in that position because it explains as much as anything else I can tell you of what the difference was in the fighting of the war as between those who smelt the gunpowder and charged the enemy and lost their lives, and those who were on the other side of the river with field glasses and taking pictures. Well, that was going on. A British general, and I think I mentioned his name in the book, was in a tower on our friendly side, and he had field glasses on, and he said something that I quoted. He'd never seen such brand of bravery and heroism as the men who were charging into those machine guns. A British general made that statement.
All right.
As we were crossing the river and preparing to cross, and everybody was praying to the Lord, they felt, as I indicated, that it was a suicide mission and they weren't going to make it. But they were doing it anyway because that was their job. That was the mission. That's what we were told to do. we were told to cross that river and rout the Germans and capture the bridge. That's what we were told. Everybody who was in there was in the first wave, in which there were just two companies of H Company. Mine was, or two platoons. I had one and Rivers had the other. There were two platoons that were crossing. And the ones that chose to join us came down from regiment. They weren't part of our units, but like the chaplain said, when he was queried about it, chaplain, what are you doing here? And the chaplain said, I'll repeat this, I felt if the men ever needed me, they were going to need me now. And he kept repeating, Lord, thy will be done. Lord, thy will be done. Lord, thy will be done. He didn't say anything else except that. Lord, thy will be done. And next to him and in the boat with him was the battalion commander. And the battalion commander was saying, Hail Mary, full of grace. Hail Mary, full of grace. Hail Mary, full of grace. And then after a little bit, he kept repeating that, and they were going with their oars. He cut down what he was saying, Hail Mary, full of grace, to Hail Mary. That is, forward hail, Mary back. Forward hail with the paddle. You'll see this. You'll see it in the video. Hail Mary, full of grace. He was saying, Hail Mary, not full of grace. He was cutting it down to synchronize the rowing of the men to try to get them to go in a straight line because the currents was taking us in every which way. And the battalion commander was trying to keep us on a steady course to get to where we wanted to go. And we were wandering off. So he cut it down to, Hail Mary, full of grace, and kept repeating it, Hail Mary, Hail Mary. So if you get the movie, you will hear it in the movie because it's repeated in the movie. Lord, thy will be done, and Hail Mary, full of grace. You'll hear it. But that was all part of the frustration and the futility and adding to the point that I made that we knew it was a suicide mission. We knew it.
And so, Colonel Magellan, just for the record, even though, all the machine guns were going off and you all were in the water, where you were in your boat, you could distinctly hear them saying what they were saying, right? You heard it?
I heard them, yes.
Okay.
I heard them. I heard them. They were next to me, practically next to me. I could see them. When we were in Leicester, and I'm glad you looked up the name because it was Leicester, and I remember how it's spelled and everything. When we were in Leicester, we had our billets, and we lived in tents. We pitched tents. It was out in an open area, park area, or wherever it was, just outside of Leicester. And also, we had a Quonset hut we used as an officers' club. And at night, officers would gather there, and we'd go around there. Generally, what we'd do when we were back there, we'd play cards or poker or whatever, or even shoot dice. We did that even in the States. And so when we were back at Leicester, we'd get at the officers' club, and we'd get back there and we were shooting dice. And people would gather on with money. And the British, I should add, had allied money, which is equal to the U.S. dollar. So in other words, the British dollar was the same as ours. So if we had British dollars, we had the same value to us as American dollars. And so that we'd be shooting dice. And I remember I'd be rolling dice and shaking my dice and yelling out, here it comes, and throw out a pair of dice and they'd roll over. and then whatever it was, I got that. After I'd make a pass or two, and in dice, when you say you make a pass, you made your point or you threw a natural, then then you throw again. And if you don't pick up your winnings, you say let it ride. So let's say I was shooting $20 and I made it and it was $40, I'd say let the 40 ride. And if I made the 40, I'd say let the 40 ride. And then if the pot was $80, and I remember on one of those occasions, it got up around there, a fairly good number, and I look off to the right of me, and who's standing there but Colonel Tucker? And I'm shaking my dice and rattling my dice and yelling, $80 or whatever it was, is open, is open. Well, none of the other men would put any money to cover me because the colonel of the regiment had been covering me to that point, and they were waiting to see what he was going to do. So Colonel Tucker reaches back in his wallet and takes out his wallet, and he lays it flat on top of my money, and he says, "Maggie, fire, you're covered." But I didn't see any money. He didn't have any. He had his last money, and he was covering me, but he didn't have any money. And so I kept saying, well, $80. You're covered, he told me. So I'd reach down and I'd pull back and say, I'm shooting 20. You know, what could I say? I'm not going to shoot the 80. I withdraw my money. Well, I remember that because he was the colonel and he was shooting dice with us. Mm-hmm. He was one of the guys. And when I got out, I remember telling his sons at a reunion at Fort Bragg, where the 82nd had a reunion, and we were back there, and his sons, or part of his family, was there. And I said, I don't want to tell you this, but your dad owed me $200 when he left the service. And I wrote that in the book, and he did. And it was from crap games that he was covering me, but he'd lost his money. But I'm saying this because this was an unusual thing. Regimental commander shooting crap in the officers' club with lieutenants. But that's who we were. The war was on, and and there was nothing wrong with it. And then we'd play poker. And there were other guys that we'd play poker, and I was pretty good at poker, and I'd win a lot. And there was one guy that played poker a lot with me, and he kept losing money all the time. And he started owing me. And I don't know, he owed me quite a bit of money, in the hundreds of dollars. And we were playing a game they called Casino. I remember that, Casino. And the guy says, you're covered. And I got out of there. The guy would maybe lose $100 or $200 of his next paycheck. And they'd say, well, what are you doing in there playing with Maggie? You can't win with Maggie. He said, I'll tell you what I'm doing with Maggie. I'm just making out insurance because anybody who owes Maggie ain't going to let him get killed when he goes over there. Maggie's going to look out after him. You can rest assured if you owe Maggie, you're going to make it back. And I write all that in my book. Now, what is this? This is nothing unusual. We're combat troops. We were waiting to go into the mainland to do what we were going to do. And we played dice, and they ran money, and like one guy says, I'm taking out insurance with Maggie. Well, that's a strange way of putting it. But this is kind of what we did. When we went into town, the sirens would go off, we would go into the air raid shelters. And there was dealers in town, the liquor dealers, would get their usual amount of beer, their beer, but liquor and scotch was rationed, and they'd only get, say, 4 bottles for the whole month. And they sold it to their good customers by the drink. And they charged quite a bit by the drink. I'd come along and say, look, how many drinks are in that bottle? And the guy'd say, well, there's 40. And how much is a drink? Well, it's, it's $1 or whatever. I'll say, I'll buy the whole bottle. It wasn't intended that one guy'd buy it all, but hell, the guy's going to sell it all to me. He did. So I'd buy the whole bottle of scotch and take it back and we'd drink it up. And I'd go and buy it, and the guy, every time he got his liquor ration, he'd look for Maggie, because I'd go back to our tent and we'd open this scotch and we'd drink it. No, his name was Murphy, and he owed me money. And so when we left England to go into Holland, he gave me an IOU, and he addressed it to his mother. He says, "Mom, give this Greek son of a bitch $100. That's what I owe him from here." And he gave it to me, and he wrote it out. He wrote it out longhand. I had it for a while, and eventually I threw it away. It didn't mean anything. It was a card game. It didn't have the same meaning as I gave $100.
Sure.
But he did write that note. And if I went through my memos of England, I might even find in there where guys would say, "Dear Mom, give this Greek son of a bitch $100 or whatever it was." And I wrote it in there because that's what they do. They owed me money, they'd give me an IOU.
Sure.
That's strange for combat troops, but what else were we supposed to do in England except prepare to whatever we were going to do when we were called on to in our next mission